Helldivers has taken the world by storm, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit after picking it up a couple weeks ago. One thing that especially piqued my interest is Arrowhead Studios' incentive design. On one hand, it's probably the most unique, pioneering, and well-realized aspects of the game, and on the other, it seems almost short-sighted and undercooked. Now that I'm developing a game of my own, I started to look at systems and mechanics like this in a different way. And I think Helldivers 2 has a lot of interesting facets regarding its incentive design, so I wanted to make a video that documents my thoughts on it. Let me get into the positives first because there's a lot to praise here. First off, I love the Galactic War Map. The Galactic War Map is essentially a series of ongoing community events where players directly impact which environmental content or planets that the community has access to by choosing to complete missions on them and either liberate or defend them. This is such a great concept that helps foster a sort of shared and ongoing story that players are already documenting as history, such as the triumphs and the horrors of Malevelon Creek. The second incentive system I'd like to highlight is that they made the release of the exosuits, or mechs, into a community event where players directly impacted the release timing of new stratagem content. And I love this sort of system because it allows players to really feel the effects of their efforts with huge, unique, permanent rewards like the ability to summon in a controllable mech that actually expands upon the core gameplay loop. So number 3. They used this exosuit community event to incentivize players to explore a planet that had a new and exciting type of weather effect. The visually spectacular and gameplay impacting meteor showers of Tien Quan. This is kind of subtle, but by using the very direct reward of go over here to unlock your mech suits, they were able to get the juices flowing for players to start thinking, hey, isn't it cool to enjoy the different effects of new planets? These aren't just reskins of each other. I wonder what environments might be out there for us to liberate or defend later. So the final incentive system I really want to praise is just the fact that they made their premium currency super credits obtainable not only via their free battle pass, but also obtainable via the in-game missions. This is a pretty clever retention mechanic because even though you need to purchase the game at what I'd say is a fair price point, you can also purchase additional cosmetics and a premium battle pass if you buy the premium currency. Having the ability to collect it in-game makes it so players have the option of purchasing the premium battle pass and cosmetics just by playing the game. That all being said, I do see some issues with the incentive design that I'd like to offer some constructive criticism for. So for the first one, I mentioned how I love the concept of the Galactic War Map. What I have an issue with is the execution of it. The Galactic War Map percentage tracker looks to be impacted only by the amount of missions you've completed, not the difficulty nor the amount of side objectives you've completed, which would mean that rushing through missions on the easiest difficulty and ignoring everything besides the primary objective is the most efficient way for everyone to liberate or defend planets. This is an issue because I don't think this method of play supports the type of fantasy Helldivers 2 is looking to create. Wouldn't it be more thematic and compelling to have a more risk-reward system where missions completed on higher level difficulties contributed more to the Galactic War Map progression? The next one is that there's nothing to purchase with the requisition slips once you've maxed out your ship. This is an issue because once you've unlocked everything with the requisition slips, they cease to be a compelling reward until a new stratagem is designed and released. The one after that is pretty much the same thing, but having to do with super samples once you've spent 30 of them. And it's an issue because once you've unlocked everything with them, they cease to be a compelling reward until a new ship upgrade is designed and released. So if you combine that with the fact that you only need to do a handful of Helldives to get them, you're kind of capped out at this point, and capped out kind of early, I'd say. Finally, the last piece I wanted to spotlight that could use some tweaking is that the most efficient way to obtain super credits is to play on the easiest difficulty and ignore the objective. This is an issue because when you choose to play on harder difficulties, you're essentially choosing to slow down the rate in which you unlock super credits. And some of you might look at all these and say, Well, sure, you don't have to play in a way that's quote-unquote efficient. You should play in a way that's fun. And I totally get that. But since it's been shown time and time again that players will typically optimize the fun out of the game if given the chance, part of great game design is setting up guardrails that prevent that scenario from happening. And I get it. You're never going to stop people who are focused on farming from farming, but there are steps you can take to mitigate the effects of it. A good way of doing this is by making the extrinsic motivators complement the intrinsic motivators rather than be at odds with them. So to explain this a bit, intrinsic motivation is when you do something because you inherently enjoy the activity. Examples could be something like wanting to solo a difficult mission, or wanting to see if you can clear a whole terminid nest with just one eagle airstrike, or wanting to see what happens when you set off a nuke at your feet but then hug someone with a shield backpack. Extrinsic motivation is when you take part in an activity because you will receive some type of reward for doing so. Some examples would be wanting to just get more in-game currency or upgrades, or wanting to increase your kill count on your player card, or wanting to get a specific achievement. So why did we just go into a miniature psychology lesson? Well, because when it comes to incentive design, balancing these two really comes down to the type of game you're looking to make. You typically don't want your motivators to be at odds with each other, especially in a multiplayer game as a service where player retention directly impacts the community events. The relationship between these two types of motivators can get pretty complex. And the good news is that Arrowhead Studios is usually quite adept at navigating this sort of thing. We see evidence of this in what I mentioned previously. There's the way that they released the mechs, the extrinsic motivator, via a community event that had you explore and liberate Tien Quan, a unique environment that inspires intrinsic motivation. And we also see this in the little details, like the way they designed the achievement for killing a charger with a supply drop. Once you've gotten the achievement, or even just read about it, you recognize that there are more creative ways to take on objectives and may feel compelled to try them out. And I could probably make an entire video arguing that extrinsic and intrinsic motivation are more similar to reciprocal and true altruism and sort of on a spectrum with milestones based on abstraction, but that's getting a bit into the weeds for this video. Instead, let's talk about the economy, since that's an area I believe has some interesting, low-effort, high-impact solutions. Looking at the state of things, we see that the currency pools have been capped, which helps to limit the currency inflation at the cost of removing extrinsic motivation for those who are carrying the maximum amount of currency. This means that every time someone with capped currency goes and does a mission, they will not receive any more currency because they're not able to hold any larger amount than what they currently have. But what are some ways we could tweak the incentive design when you've gotten to the point where some players are able to obtain currency faster than you are able to develop content that it can be spent on? Keep in mind that players in this position are often ones who absolutely love and are devouring your game, and you plan on releasing content later down the line at a currency cost that makes sense to the general wider audience of the game. How do we balance that? Well, one way is through currency sinks. A currency sink is a method in which players are incentivized to get rid of their hoarded currency to prevent it from becoming inflated. The differentiator between a currency sink and just more content, at least from a design standpoint, is that a currency sink will take relatively low effort in terms of design time by comparison, but will help deflate the currency that it's targeting, and in most cases have at least some significant impact on providing an extrinsic motivator for the player. Some examples of a currency sink could be as simple as being able to trade your common currencies for a rarer currency at a rate that isn't optimal, but at least gives you the option. I typically don't like this type of sink very much because it's essentially just kicking the can down the road, but I'll explain two very similar scenarios that would have quite different results. The first way we could do this is we could give players a mechanic where we're able to trade a large amount of common samples for a small amount of another currency, like super samples. The issue here, that I would argue at least, is super samples are too inflated already to be an adequate sink for other currencies. In all honesty, with the current ways that we can make use of samples in general, the sample economy is a bit too shallow to introduce functionality for trading up from green to orange to pink, or even trading down from pink to orange to green. I can definitely see merit in functionality like this in the future, especially since its inclusion would allow players to play on any difficulty and still be earning currency that's relevant to them. But at this stage of Helldivers' life cycle, I wouldn't prioritize it because doing this has the potential to cap a larger portion of the player base. The second scenario is, let's say we were able to trade a large amount of requisition slips for a very small amount of super credits. This is potentially useful to the current state of Helldivers' economy and incentive structure because it at least solves two of the issues that I brought up. In this scenario, requisition slips now have near infinite potential, and depending on the exchange rate, running the easiest missions will no longer be the most time-efficient way to obtain super credits. While both examples are essentially kicking the can down the road in terms of inflation, the second one gives us a bit more breathing room. But can we do better than this? Let's think about it. One capped currency we haven't even talked about yet is player experience, which at the moment functions as a way to determine which stratagems and titles you have access to. Since we stopped getting new stratagems after level 20, and the level cap is currently 50, I don't see a realistic way of experience retaining its job of gating new stratagems in the future. Instead, I'd enjoy seeing it open up to have a much larger level cap of something like 1,000, where every 25 levels you'd get a set title you could use. Maybe every 10 levels you could get a random title to spice things up. That could be fun, but we also need to consider the tone of the game. When we think about it, the better designed a currency sink is, the more it resembles or even starts to become compelling content. If we think about the type of currency sink that would gel best with the themes, systems, and game design that have already been established, I'd suggest adding a mechanic where players could pay something like 10,000 requisition slips and somewhere a squad that they have never met but is on a mission and has run out of reinforcements, they will automatically get 4 more reinforcements. And that squad would get a message saying something along the lines of, player name has allocated funds to democracy and Liberty has chosen this squad. Later, you get a message letting you know that the squad completed their mission or didn't, and this is also marked in your player card. And maybe if you've funded enough successful missions, you'd get a unique title. So the intent of a mechanic like this is that it would be a sink. It would flush a large amount of currency out of the game economy, but it would also provide a unique reward for the player for doing so without causing too much inflation to the other currencies. And it even bolster the immersion storytelling elements that made this game so fresh and compelling to begin with. The downside is that, while this is my take on a minimum viable product of ways players can begin to impact other squads outside of their own and in an even more direct manner than just the Galactic War map, I really don't know how much development effort a mechanic or system like this might require. This might seem very simple from the outside looking in, but it may tangle up quite a bit of systems, especially if my theory is correct that Arrowhead Studios has already developed a large portion of content we have just not yet seen and is rolling it out as the Galactic War map progresses. I could probably dig into this all day because Helldivers 2 has provided such an awesome world and structure to begin with, but I do need to get to work on my Persona 6 video and also my own video game project, so I think I'll leave it here for now. But what do you think? Are there any new mechanics you'd like to see in Helldivers 2? How do you think those mechanics would affect the long-term health of the game? Is there anything you're hoping they don't change? Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyways, thanks everybody.